This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. The next two nights could prove pivotal in the federal election campaign. Party leaders face each other in the only debates of the race. Tonight's French debate is in Montreal. But just hours before the event, one party is being booted from the contest. The Debates Commission has rescinded its invitation to the Greens. The commission says the party does not meet the criteria to participate. Janice McGregor joins me now from our parliamentary bureau. And Janice, walk us through this.
Marcia, the criteria was clear here. The Green Party needed to run candidates in 90% of the ridings in order to be able to participate. And the simple fact is they didn't actually get on that many ballots. In its statement this morning, the Debates Commission says that because the party intentionally reduced the number of candidates it was running for strategic reasons, it no longer meets the intention of the rules that were set. Now, whether or not it intended at one point to run 343 candidates across Canada, as it first suggested it could, voters no longer have the opportunity to vote for that many people. A decision not to run in some ridings out of a fear of splitting the vote, for example, inconsistent, the Commission finds, with the criteria set out for a party's viability. And so, including the leader under these circumstances, the Commission said would undermine the integrity of the debates and the interests of the voting public. Green Party leader Jonathan Pedneau yesterday was defensive in an interview with CBC News, saying he wanted to talk about the party's policies, not its tactics and internal politics, but the consequence of failing to run as many people as they originally pledged is that he's not going to be talking at all tonight.
So when the remaining leaders take to the debate stage, what will you be watching for, Janice?
This year's format is going to be a more open debate with one moderator introducing each of the 5 topics, posing questions, but then the leaders are going to be able to have at each other. It could be more freewheeling, unpredictable. We've seen Yves-François Blanchet and Jagmeet Singh do this before, but we have not seen Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney do this. In fact, part of what's going to make tonight so interesting is because Carney's never even had a seat in the House of Commons, it is going to be the first time we see Poilievre and Carney square off face to face. Reporters yesterday asked the guy who is ahead in the opinion polling right now, Carney, whether he's nervous, particularly about debating in his second language first.
Look, I work on my French every day. I improve, but I think I improve. On verra. I see.
Debates don't always move the needle, but sometimes there are moments that change minds. The stakes are high tonight.
We'll see. Thanks, Janice.
You're welcome.
The CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. You can watch tonight's debate with interpretation on CBC News Network, CBC Gem, or CBC News online platforms. And a reminder, the new start time for the debate is 6 p.m. Eastern. And tomorrow, right here on CBC Radio, Susan Bonner and Pia Chattopadhyay will bring you full coverage of the federal leaders' English language debate. That begins at 7 p.m. Eastern on CBC Radio and the CBC News app. Liberal leader Mark Carney's past work at a multi-billion-dollar investment firm has been criticized by Conservatives. Now some members of that party are acknowledging they have money in the enterprise. Before entering the Liberal leadership race, Carney chaired Brookfield Asset Management, one of the world's biggest investment operations. Tom Perry has more.
Mr. Carney is not a businessman. He is a political grifter who is used.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been unsparing, attacking Mark Carney for his time at Brookfield Asset Management.
How would Mark Carney ever be trusted to make our tax system fair when he's invested in a company that has billions of dollars of cash stashed away in an overseas tax haven?
At Brookfield, Carney oversaw green energy funds set up for Canadian and international investors, but based in tax havens like Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. Carney and others have argued that's perfectly legitimate.
The structure is organized so that Canadian pension funds can get the most benefit for the pensioners, which are teachers, retired first responders, and public servants.
Records filed with the Federal Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner in 2024 show half a dozen Conservative MPs with investments in Brookfield or Brookfield-related firms. That includes Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman, who has accused Carney of dodging Canadian taxes, but who reported an undisclosed amount of shares in a Brookfield fund based in Bermuda. In a statement, a Conservative spokesperson said the party's MPs have fully disclosed their financial assets, while accusing Carney, whose assets are in a blind trust, of refusing to disclose what they call his own conflicts of interest. Tom Perry, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Bank of Canada will announce its overnight interest rate later this morning. It comes at a time of economic turmoil generated by the Trump administration's global tariffs. The rate currently stands at 2.75%. Peter Armstrong reports.
Pity the central banker looking out at 70 years of global trade alliances disintegrating, trade flows thrown into jeopardy without any clear sense of how those pieces will be patched back together. Somehow, amidst all that, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem has to set interest rates and publish a forecast with the best guess on where the economy is headed.
Unfortunately, the uncertainty we face is going to be here for a while.
That was Macklem speaking to a group called Calgary Economic Development last month. The speech came as the trade war was still just starting. The chaos and uncertainty only ratcheted up on the so-called Liberation Day of April 2nd. And even then, all anyone wanted to know was what the Bank of Canada was going to do about all this. Macklem concluded the speech with this.
Monetary policy cannot offset the effects of a trade war. What it can and must do is ensure that higher prices from a trade conflict do not become ongoing inflation.
In other words, he says the bank's key job is to manage inflation. And even in a crisis, it needs to stay focused on that job. Still, cooler than expected price growth last month does give the bank some wiggle room if it feels the economy needs the boost of a rate cut as the trade war starts to bite. Peter Armstrong, CBC News, Toronto.
Ukraine's parliament has extended martial law in the country until August. It allows Ukraine to mobilize troops and suspend the election cycle. Russia's invasion continues. Just one of the 357 lawmakers voted against the extension. Martial law in the country would have expired on May 9th. The UK Supreme Court has ruled this morning on the legal definition of woman. Here's Justice Patrick Hodge announcing that decision.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
The decision means people who are trans and have a certificate declaring them female cannot be considered women for the purpose of equality law. Justice Hodge adds, though, that trans people do have legal protections against discrimination and harassment. Rights group For Women Scotland was fighting a Scottish law that had defined those with gender recognition certificates as women. Community leaders and candidates are making a big push to get Indigenous voters to the polls. The Assembly of First Nations has identified 36 ridings where First Nations voters could determine the outcome. But Elections Canada says their data shows Indigenous people are less likely to vote than non-Indigenous Canadians. Karen Pauls has more on the story.
Churchill-Kiiwetinoong-Aski is Manitoba's northernmost and largest riding, pretty much the same size as Sweden. Candidates have been traveling on ice roads, real roads and planes to connect with voters. Rebecca Chartrand is the Liberal candidate.
I think we have a common enemy, and that's what's happening with the Trump tariffs. So I'm hoping that it creates the type of momentum that we need in this riding to get people out and vote.
This is one of the 36 ridings where the outcome could be determined by First Nations voters if they show up. The incumbent NDP candidate Nikki Ashton won the last two elections by more than 3,000 votes.
In the country, there's a lot of people that care deeply about who represents them and the issues that matter to our communities, but they also face various barriers, which does contribute to a lower turnout.
Micah Richard and Leonard Ross are concerned about healthcare, housing, and the cost of living, but they're not sure if they'll bother voting.
I just don't really pay attention to any of the elections anymore.
I do know they don't live up to their promises.
Rock the vote. Rock the vote. Rock the vote.
It's why some First Nations leaders have launched a campaign to encourage people to participate. Grand Chief Garrison Settee represents 26 First Nations in northern Manitoba.
You must vote. It will affect your family. It will affect your nation. It's that important.
Advanced polling stations are open this coming long weekend. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.